3D Printing Today, show number 383. Crowdfunding fails. Getting a clean bottom with the belt.
Welcome back to 3D Printing Today, the podcast about all aspects of 3D printing. Hobby, professional, industrial, it doesn't matter. We cover it all. My name's Andy Cohen, and I'm here with Mr. Whitney Potter.
How you doing, Andy?
Doing pretty good. So the story we have this week is kind of a different type of story. It seems we're hearing that Google has partnered with Scan the World. We've talked about Scan the World quite a bit on this podcast in the past, haven't we?
You bet. I actually have a couple pieces in their collection.
You do?
Yeah. A couple of photogrammetry scans that I did of just statues and stuff that I encountered in my travels that I uploaded to Thingiverse, I think, and maybe my Mini Factory, and somehow they asked for permission to put them in the collection, and there they are. So
that's cool. Wow. I didn't know that. That's awesome. Now, I've kind of learned. I was never an appreciative viewer of sculpture in growing up. I looked at it; it was there, meh. And it took me a long time growing up to appreciate and learn to appreciate art. But still, sculpture didn't really ring my bell until 3D printing, and I've learned to appreciate sculpture thanks to the jobs that I've had for sculptors where we live. We get sculptures coming to me a lot for scanning in low quality or smaller objects that they want to enlarge or enhance. And over the years, I've been doing it now for, 7 or 8 years. I've learned to appreciate what they were doing, and I've learned to really learn about sculpture. Since then, my daughter, who's an artist, she's taught me quite a bit as well. And these days, when I look at classic sculpture from the greats, the masters, I kind of get it, and I can't stop looking. And I'm amazed and blown away by it. In many, many ways, it's more impactful than watching a movie in many, many ways. And so when I see objects of art that we could 3D print these days, it adds a whole new dimension for why I 3D print. And I've got stuff all around my house that I've 3D printed that is a combination of modern and classical artwork that I wouldn't have had. I would not have had it if I was not a 3D print wonk. So there's a lot to be said for some of the stuff that you can 3D print that's classic art. And one of the classic artworks that has really impressed me over the years, even when I was a little kid, because I did get to see this piece of work as a little kid at the World's Fair, was Michelangelo's Pieta, or La Pieta, excuse me. And from what I learned a couple of years ago when I saw it again, is that it was Michelangelo's first major sculpture, and he liked it so much that it's the only major sculpture work he's ever done that he signed himself.
So which, you say you saw it at the World's Fair, was that the original actually toured?
Yes.
And which World's Fair was this?
64, 65 in Queens, New York. The New York
Is that the
World's
one with
Fair.
the cool flying saucer things?
I don't know about the flying saucer things. I didn't see that.
There was like this sculpture thing. It shows up in Men in Black.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That was in Men in
World's
Black.
Fair?
Yeah, the Unisphere. Yeah. Unisphere was there. And those saucer things, that was the New York State Pavilion that you're talking about.
Cool.
And that was actually pretty cool back in 64, 65. Today, it's a derelict. But Rome sent La Pieta to them in Queens, and the Italian pavilion had it there. And I saw it as a little kid, and it really impressed me. And I saw it again in the Vatican in 2019. And on Thingiverse, if you were to search for La Pieta because you wanted to try 3D printing it, which I did, you'll only find one object on Thingiverse which is accurate. The rest are people's interpretations of it or copying it. To get an accurate image or copy of the actual classical sculpture is not that easy. And the only sculpture on Thingiverse that is accurate is the head of Mary from La Pieta. I'll put that reference in our show notes for folks if they're interested. But on this website, artsandculture.google.com, it's the page that has the Scan the World. If you scroll down, you will find La Pieta, and the scan is made from a casting of the actual statue, which would mean that while, it's not a scan of the actual statue, but it's the closest thing that we're going to get to Michelangelo's real work out of your 3D printer. Now, it's probably not a very easy thing to 3D print because there's all sorts of gaps and weird locations and hard to get to print things. And I'm looking at the actual 3D object. I would probably chop it up into separate pieces to get the optimal print out of it. So it's not an easy print, but if you're really into artwork, it looks like this is the place to go to get objects to print. Really great stuff. La Pieta is just one example. All the great works are in there, along with stuff that you may never have seen before.
Yeah, it's an incredible collection, and you think for museums around the world, the letting people come in and do archival quality scans of their objects should be a no-brainer, because scanning is a non-contact activity. You're not actually touching the artwork. Some of them are behind glass, so you'd require special access to actually get behind the glass to scan them. But then museums get weird about their artwork. They think oh, we have a copyright on this, you can't scan it. Of course you don't have a copyright on it. It was made 800 years ago. How could you possibly hold a copyright to it? But some of the museums seem to get kind of weird about it. You can read some of the stories around people scanning them, but it's neat, all of the stuff that is out there, and it's definitely, if you're looking for something spectacular to print, good place to look.
Now, these are the classic works. That said, there's also modern art that's becoming more and more the 3D media as the artistic medium that we're going to see more and more of. Like, for example, 3Dizing Off is a good example of that. We're going to see more and more of that in the future. The art world and 3D printing go hand in hand beautifully. And I hope that folks, if you're into it, would check this out. In the meantime, Whitney, we do have a show this week. It's only 2 episodes, 2 segments, but they're long ones. So what's the first one?
We start out talking about crowdfunding fails.
And then I'm going to talk about how I got around that extreme pattern from the aggressive belt on the iFactory one. Let's do it.
Oh, that's what getting a clean bottom with the belt means.
Yeah. So thanks to an old friend of ours, Dan Newman, who posted this on our Google group. There's an update, an interesting story about what happens to sometimes these crowdfunded ventures that happen. I've got a list of crowdfunding things I've done through Indiegogo and through Kickstarter, which are successes, and I've got a bunch that are fails. And Dan reminded us all of the Ono, which really was the something else, Oho or something else, and it turned out they used the same name as somebody else, and they changed it to Ono, and it turned out to be very prophetic because it was a complete waste of time and money, and yet they were able to walk away with a large amount of cash.
I don't know that they walked away with it. They raised the money. The question is, where is the money now? And did they spend it trying to build these prototypes, or did they actually just pocket it?
Yeah, we don't know that from the article. The article is in our show notes on our Google group, and it'll be there for Facebook as well. Basically, this was the Kickstarter campaign where you use a cell phone and you put this contraption over your cell phone, and it connects into the earbud connector, and it shows the light on, it shows the layer on the cell phone, and you use resin that's ambient light sensitive, and the cell phone's white light would cure a complete mess. I mean, the first time I looked at it, and I remember telling my friends on the older forums, no, that none of that works right. And then as the months had gone by, they kept posting things that were hints that were like obvious that these guys did not know what they were doing. And sure, and then they went and they did another campaign, and they piled up quite a bit of money, according to what we're reading here, and they never delivered, and they never will deliver because they really don't know what they're doing. And who wants to give up their cell phone for the hours it's going to take to 3D print the part?
Right. It's just a bad idea to begin with. The idea that you're going to take your cell phone, which is, I mean, your modern cell phone is, $1,000 more or less. And the idea that A, you're going to give up use of it, and B, you're going to exposing it to liquid photopolymer resin. Who in their right mind is going to do that? And especially because now in the time that this project has been in development, the phone screen based printers have come down to, they're like $200 now for some of them.
Yeah.
And you don't need to have your $1,000 cell phone involved.
Well, this kind of brings up the whole notion of how do you know a campaign can make it? How do you know if they could really do it? Now, in this particular case, and there are other examples that they've written about in the years past, there are hints. You look at the people involved, you look at their past, you look at what they've done, and even when you do that, you can still make a bad gamble. Now, you got to keep in mind that when you're buying on a crowdfunded thing like Kickstarter, you shouldn't be thinking, oh, I can get a cheap 3D printer. You shouldn't think that way. You can get a cheap 3D printer. Like, for example, my Race 3D N2 in the garage, I paid $1,500 for it brand new. Now, brand new back then meant I had to fix it because it was still, not fully baked. But today, a Race 3D N2 Plus, I think they call it, or N2 something, N2 Pro, that's big bucks. That's not cheap. It's an expensive 3D printer.
Right, but pay yourself minimum wage. Did you make anything on that? I don't think so. I know Dr. Cohen, your billable is way above minimum wage.
Yeah. So then in that case, even when I did get a 3D printer, it's questionable as to whether the idea of getting an inexpensive, a low-priced bargain, it's just not realistic. You can't, if you're looking for a bargain, the last place you should be looking after Alibaba is Kickstarter. You don't want to buy a 3D printer that way. Now, when we heard about the iFactory, my motivation was, why would I bother? Why would I bother with the 3D print mill or the iFactory when I just kick back and let other people sweat the problems and pay their dues to fix it? And then I'll just pay the $1,000 and get it fully worked out. We went ahead and backed them anyway, not because of the 3D printer, but because of them as a company. We want to see iFactory as David beat the Chinese Goliath, Creality. Now, since we've gotten the iFactory one, and I've gotten to know more about what Martin and Artur had done and what they're doing, I now feel that David's going to get stomped out really badly because, as an example, we did a segment on iFactory gotchas. We left one big one out, and that was the user interface panel on the machine itself is completely ineffective. They made a bad design decision when they decided to use the Raspberry Pi based UI panel. It simply doesn't work. It crashes constantly. If you get into a situation where there's noise, some EM noise in your room, the USB cables pick up that noise and it gets into a reboot cycle and the printer becomes useless. And you have to power it down and unplug everything and make sure that everything's unplugged and the EM source is turned off and then turn it all back on again to get it to work. That's the kind of design detail that people who don't know what they're doing do. And these guys, I now know they don't know what they're doing. Can they make it as a company? I'd say no. And I'd say that Goliath is going to stomp David pretty badly.
Well, when you look at sort of the fate of a Kickstarter, a company, it's there are a lot of ways they can die and very few that they can succeed. It seems like that. I mean, nobody's going to have a perfect product, and if your product is perfect right out the door, it's because you didn't push it hard enough. So it's probably not going to succeed because it's not going to be differentiated enough. And it's something with the Creality has this huge industrial backing. They can basically afford to eat whatever this little project costs if it doesn't go well. Versus the iFactory guys, this is all they got. They don't have a huge company backing them. If they made a bad choice on a part and end up having to replace a whole bunch of them to keep people from not to keep people from being happy, to keep people happy, but to keep people from being enraged, they're going to be paying for that out of their funds, and their funds are a heck of a lot more limited than Creality's are. So
and one would argue, why would anybody do that? Why would anybody pick a bad part? Why would they decide to go with this UI panel and this incredibly bad controller board? It's because they didn't know what they didn't know. They would not choose to pick a part that would enrage their users. But if they don't know they've got a bad part, you get enraged users. It's not just the bad part. For example, I asked them, guys, are you going to do collaborative assembly manual? And Martin on the vid, he shakes his head like, no, why would I want to do that? Well, you want to do that so that when we find what you did wrong, we can correct it so those who build it after us don't go through the same heartache and agony that we went through. And I made that clear to them later, and they've capitulated, and supposedly they're thinking of doing it. But, I mean, they've done other stuff like all their supports on Facebook and Discord. That doesn't make any sense. Discord's for gamers, and it's worse than Twitter. And Facebook is Facebook. You start talking with posts, and 2 weeks later, those posts are so hard to find that they're gone. So you get people
2 hours
asking,
later, they're hard to find.
2 hours later. And so you get people asking the same question over and over and over again because they can't find the solution that's buried from 2 weeks ago. They just don't know that. They just didn't know because they're not experienced enough to pull it off. Now, that said, last year, we backed the CR6 as a Kickstarter campaign. The CR6 delivered on time. And what I got was a very, very polished, ready-to-print machine. And I was stunned by it. I saved probably about $50 off the current price, but that might be wrong because I suspect if you were to go online and dig around, you could probably today get the CR6 for what I paid for it as a Kickstarter. So there was no advantage to buying it as a Kickstarter. None. But that's Creality, and Creality simply took the Ender 3 and the CR10 and polished and shrunk it and made it really pretty and nice and added some neat things. So they didn't really take a chance. They didn't really gamble, and they knew what they were doing. That's why, when you go to Kickstarter or Indiegogo or anything like them, if you're thinking you're going to get a bargain, right away, you're not. So don't do it.
Well, don't expect polished, finished product from Kickstarter. That's its very nature. You can expect to get something before everybody else does, and that might be an exciting thing.
Yeah.
You can expect a project that you're buying, and yeah, that might be exciting if as long as you know what you're getting in for. But if it's your first 3D printer and you think, oh, this one looks like a really good price on Kickstarter, for God's sake, don't.
So this was not our first 3D printer. And for a lot of the folks I've been chatting with through Facebook, it's not their first 3D printer either. And yet we're all making the same things. The same issues are cropping up for almost every build. For example, there's a bug in the firmware so that to set Y to 0, when you do the M206 command, sometimes it simply adds your position. See, this is how it's supposed to be done. You home the printer, and then you jog the nozzle down to the bed onto a piece of paper till it's snug on the paper and the paper can still move. You M14 and get your Y position. Then you M206 the reverse of that Y position to get the offset so that nozzle's always placed where you need it to be placed when it goes to 0. And of course you M500 to save everything constantly. Well, what happens is sometimes when you do that M206 with that reverse number, it adds it instead of subtracts it. And you end up with the reverse. So what you have to do, and this was buried deep down in Facebook, what you have to do is after you home it, you have to set Y to 0. You M206 Y0 M500. And that tells the firmware, don't add it, keep it clean. And then you jog down to the belt, put the card in there, M14 to get your location, put the reverse of that as an M214 and M500 to save it. And now you're good to go. It's all going to work. And then you home and then M114 to see that Y now should equal 330 to get that proper offset. Okay, that fix was posted in Facebook twice. 1 week later, people are still posting, how come I can't do this? Because those posts were lost. They're gone. Why? Because Martin and Arthur put it on Facebook and not on their own forum. Now they're scrambling to get their own forum because they're realizing they're not going to get free support on Facebook. It's not going to work. They're scrambling to help people because people are calling them constantly with this problem.
How hard is it to set up a Google group, though?
Oh, it's really hard. You have to think of the name of the group and then you have to push a button. Really hard. I've told them. I've tried to explain it to them. And then there's Dazuki. Dazuki for the tool changer was brilliant. Every time one of us figured out a better way to do something, we posted into the actual assembly manual on Dazuki. And so all of those who followed after us found it way easier to build, and it overcame all the problems, all the issues. I mentioned Dazuki to Martin. He looked at me like, what are you talking about? No way. I'm going to put it in a PDF and send it to you. Oh, well. That's what happens. You didn't know what they didn't know.
There's all kinds of ways you could do it, though. I mean, there's some companies use a wiki, and I'm literally using the Wikipedia. I mean, what Wikipedia is based on,
right,
is the wiki framework, and that's open source. You can use that for free. You've just got to set it up on a server somewhere.
But here's the thing: I was told, well, to do it in Dazuki, you got to pay a certain amount a month. Well, this is a for-profit business, and you did ask us for money in the Kickstarter, and you did get that money. I'm a little bit at a loss here. So, can these guys make it as a company? I would say no. I don't think they have what it takes. They don't have enough experience, and they have too much hubris to realize they don't have the experience. And I think Creality is going to come in and take all their cheese away from them. I think that's going to happen. We'll see. We're months away from Creality actually getting the CR30 out. And for all we know, there could be gotchas with the CR30. We're going to find out.
I'm sure there will be.
So if you've been listening to our podcast the past few weeks or months or so, it's been weeks, I imagine. We started talking about the iFactory Infinite Z belt printer, which we got an early version of back in December, built it, having a great time with it. And one of the things I said about it, and it's still true, is that, and it was a criticism, a serious criticism, is that when you print on the belt to get optimal stick, the plastic has to melt into the pattern on the belt, and the pattern on the belt is fairly aggressive. It's a kind of a weave pattern. Plastic seeps in, holds the plastic down on the belt until it's at the end of the belt, and as the belt rolls underneath, the part slowly comes off into a bin. Works great, but, and this was a big but, the pattern is in the plastic. And it's not necessarily an ugly pattern. I mean, we have had patterns in the bottoms of our 3D prints with build tack and blue tape and other mechanical forms of grip holding the object to the plate. But the belt, it's this weaving pattern, and if you're going to glue these two surfaces together, you're going to get a gap. The tolerances are way too low. You're not going to get a clean, high tolerance edge surface. You may not get warping. I mean, we'll talk about warping on the belt in another topic, but you won't be able to get it nice and smooth, like glass-like finish. And that always bothered me. And I always felt it is what it is. You can't get around it. But I always, in the back of my mind, thought there's got to be a trick that we could do that could get rid of that pattern. So I thought about it, and I thought, well, what if I make the equivalent of a helper disc, and I get it like one layer thick, and I put it right on the edge of the object, and I raise the object up a bit so that the helper disc holds the object to the belt, but underneath it bridges or just barely sits on the belt. Because one thing I found out by accident, by doing it incorrectly, was that if you just have the nozzle just a bit above the belt and let the plastic just kind of land on the belt, you get a nice clean finish. It won't stick. You don't get stick to the belt, but it's still clean. And if it's attached to something else, it won't come off the belt. Like if there's another part of the plastic that's embedded into the belt. So I thought, well, let's make some helper discs and put it on the side of the object to hold it down and have the object raised up a touch. What I found was using either Cura or Ideamaker, the two slicers that we have that will currently do 45-degree angle slicing, it just wouldn't work. I couldn't get the object high enough to stay without it still seeping in to the belt and giving me the patterned effect. So I thought, well, maybe there's another way, and I knew I could do it, but I just kind of moved on, and I figured I'll get back to it later. And then I'm printing something for the Book Nook. Remember, I made the Book Nook, the big model of the alley,
Nocturne Alley,
yeah. And there's a sign. If you go to our Google group, you'll see I posted pictures of this. There's a little sign, and by accident, I had full support turned on, and the sign was about a millimeter up off the bed, and I didn't know. And I printed it, and when it was printed, I took it all off the bed, and then after I looked at it, I realized, wait a minute, why does that look so weird underneath? It turned out that it had been raised up and it had printed a support layer. And that support layer popped off, and the underneath was a pristine, perfect bottom. Oh. So I thought about it and realized that when you have support underneath on the belt, it's not like it is on a conventional 3D printer where it's perpendicular to your object and then marring everything. Instead, it's a complementary 45-degree angle. Perfect. It's perfect because the object sits on it and supports itself when it fuses to the previous and the next layers. So it's going to be a nice clean finish on the bottom. So let's test it. And again, you'll see the resulting picture on our Google group. I printed a sword. I'm going to show it to my buddy on the camera. I printed a long sword to see, well, maybe the plastic would come off the support, or maybe it'll warp a bit. Because sometimes when you print from underneath, it won't hold it down. Like when you use a raft, sometimes that's why we hated rafts. But essentially what I'm talking about here is a raft generated by support underneath the object on the bed. And it worked brilliantly. That I'm showing the picture to my friend on the camera. You can see there's no pattern at all except the layers.
Yeah, that looks good. It's funny how with the belt printer, just shifting everything to 45 degrees, changes everything.
It changes everything, but I should, and it does open up new use cases. So this would have been a use case limiting thing. The pattern on the bottom, that would have eliminated a lot of use cases, because a lot of use cases you split the object and you want to glue them together, and you need a clean seam for that to work really well. And the pattern on the bottom of the object would have ruined that seam. Well, I found a way around that, which now opens up these use cases to the belt. I can now do a lot more use cases. That said, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect solution. Now, I've also printed and shown pictures on the Google group of prints that I've done on either my Clone R1 or the Tool Changer, which are both Core XY machines, versus the Belt machine, which is, by the way, also a Core XY machine. But the other two are the conventional style, which are printing perpendicular to the bed, versus the 45-degree angle. And I got these little barrels that I'm going to put in the Nocturne Alley book nook. These cute little barrels.
Yeah, those are beautifully detailed.
One I printed on the Tool Changer. The other I printed with the iFactory 1. And the one on the Tool Changer is way superior. It's way superior. The iFactory 1 barrel, it has the issues I've always warned folks about over the past couple of years about belt printers and 45-degree angle printing. And that's at the top of the tool path, at the top of that 45 degrees, where the tool path ends at the top, you're always going to have some issues. And maybe there's a way we can figure out how to minimize them. We need to experiment and play with it more, like I did with the bottoms. But for now, that tool path issue is still, you still can't get clean. You still can't get it just right on shapes, on organic shapes. On a flat surface, you can. Go on.
Do you think if you were reducing the extrusion rate or something on those areas, you could improve it?
We'll find out. We'll be experimenting with it and talking about it here. But it was the one thing about the White Knight back in 2019 at Murph, sitting there watching it print samples, and I would watch it go to the beginning. The beginning is always an issue, and the end is always an issue. So it is what it is. So if you have an object that extends outward before the foot on the belt, that object's going to need support. That little area is going to print into nothing. And you have to have support built up underneath it for that to work. And there's no there's nothing around it. Now, when you print with support on the belt and there's material around that tool path, around that where you're extruding, it's going to be complementary. It's going to butt up against another layer, and the support will help it. But when there's nothing there, it goes directly onto the support, and it's not going to go well. It's going to be mottled and marred, and there's really no way around it. So one of the things I'm going to be looking at, well, you have to position your object with nothing forward of the starting line. That's kind of a rule that you have to stick by. If your use case requires that, then you have to think of something else, either rotating the object, orienting the object differently, chopping it in half, but something to overcome that. So there's just no way around that. Now, on the other end of the toolpath, where it's the top, supports will help. One thing I'm looking at that I may experiment with is a wider extrusion width. So you get a little bit more support from the previous layer underneath. We'll see how well that works. And we'll report back here. Oh boy, Whitney, another show is written to my hard drive, waiting for encoding, uploading, and commitment on our feed. To all of our very supportive listeners, thank you all out there for your support on Patreon. Thank you for your positive reviews, wherever reviews can be written up and posted. We do really appreciate those. And hey, thanks for listening. We do it for you. We do it for fun, like we say every time. No advertisements. We don't even advertise ourselves. Okay, I got the thing of the week this week.
Yep.
Now, we don't usually often look for toys on this podcast, and because there are so many toys, but this particular toy related 3D print thing really kind of pushed my buttons, because when I was a little kid, I was really into electric trains and slot cars, and the idea of having the power to be able to design your own track at any size, at any extent, just really got me excited. So what I'm going to propose as thing of the week this week is the Pentagon/Star layout rail for the Japanese play rail system. Now, this is thing number 4836192, which comes to us from a Thingiverse user by the handle, looks like HJ Fuji.
Yes, otherwise known as Hajime Fujimoto.
We believe he's in Japan. He or she is in Japan, and but we make that assumption because of the photograph on the posting on Thingiverse. The background is obviously not an American or probably not a European image. That looks like a Japanese domicile to me. Does it look like
got
that
a lot of
you?
shoji screens?
Yeah, a lot of screening, a bamboo floor. Now the things are
and
actually,
a fair number of his posts are actually in Japanese, so that's a good guess.
It's a safe guess. So the things are actually the track parts that you could 3D print for an electric train system where the train itself is all self-contained. Unlike most electric trains like N-gauge and HO gauge, where the track provides the power to the motor in the engine, traditional American electric trains and European electric trains, this particular toy, all the electricity is self-contained in the train system. It's called PlayRail. You can get them on Amazon for about $40, and the track therefore has no resources in it, so you could 3D print track segments. And this Thingiverse user created the track segments to make what is a stunningly amazing pattern in what must be their entire apartment. It's pretty incredible. And then I highly recommend go to the post and check out the video on the post, because like a lot of electric trains enthusiasts these days, he put some kind of a camera on the train itself, and you get to ride through this amazing track. Very, very impressive. What do you think?
What I especially like about it is it's called PlayRail, right? But play is spelled PLA, right? So what filament are you going to use, Andy?
Well, I'm probably not going to print this because I don't have the room for a track like that. But I probably would use PLA because of the cost, because there's a lot of track there. And you'll be printing for quite a while, which is okay. Could be fun. But if you've got a kid, and that kid loves trains, and they're not necessarily old enough for a full-up HO or N-gauge system, or the larger versions, this is a great alternative to get them started on it because it looks like a blast. Looks like so much fun. If you've got a tip, a question, or a candidate thing of the week, please don't hesitate. Send us an email.
Send it to info@3dprintingtoday.com. That's THREE, the letter D, printingtoday.com.
And we also invite you to join our forum on Google Groups. Just go to Google and do a search on 3D printing tips and tricks. When you get there, you have to hit the join button if you want to post. We also still have our group on Facebook. Just go to Facebook and search 3D Printing Today, number 3 and 3D in 3 separate words. It's an open forum. There's nothing that you have to join. So let's see. We do have a show next week, Whitney.
We do. We start out talking about a foam nozzle.
You're going to give us part 3 of your do-it-yourself LiDAR system.
And then you're going to give us some tool changer advice.
Sounds great. I guess that's it.
Great. Thanks for listening.